Hi, again, my name's Chris Brenner. I'm a senior director for 221B Partners. We're a small kind of boutique and an investigations and intelligence firm based in Chicago. That's slide number one. There we go. I've been in the investigations field for almost 15 years now, starting kind of in insurance, doing boring work, honestly. A lot of workers' comp and auto liability claims investigations, but I had the opportunity to transition kind of to broader corporate investigations and intelligence work. And I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of interesting cases with a lot of interesting types of clients. And one thing that sort of is ever present, like Matt, you mentioned, is everybody wants a lot of data until they have it. And through both of these kind of career areas, I've been faced with some challenges when it comes to managing and analyzing data and information that's acquired through an investigation, whether it's from true open source work or a hybrid of publicly available information, commercial databases, client supplied data, sometimes subpoena productions, and just other sources. And today, we're going to hopefully talk through some considerations and some tools, almost all of which are either free or things you probably already have access to. And some examples of how I've worked with some of these large and weird types of data for investigations, although it sounds like, Matt, you might have had some much larger and much weirder things working, for some government types of projects. Like I said, we work with a variety of different client types, and we support everything from private equity investors to manufacturing companies to the entertainment industry, law firms, educational institutions, you name it. And whether it's due diligence or internal theft or fraud or threat investigations, there's always the potential for either being given or uncovering just some big pile of information that you need to incorporate into an investigation and need to figure out how to deal with, and most importantly, present to the client in a way that helps tell the story of the data in a way that is digestible and actionable for them. So hopefully, this is going to be useful to others working in the field. I've largely been self-taught, although some of the speakers I recognize names of and have definitely learned from before. And some of this might seem basic, some of it might seem more advanced, but hopefully no matter what your skill level or experience level is, there's a useful takeaway here. The types of data that we encounter and solutions for handling it can be as simple as, rows and columns in a table, or it's unstructured data in PDFs from court filings or other documents. Maybe it's a zip file that's sent to you from a client full of text files or MP3 voice recordings, or you've got PSTs or other types of email archives, copies of phone bills or other location data. Maybe you've got the luxury of working with Multigo and some other transforms and APIs that are available, and you've got 15,000 different data points mapped out. Often we're layering all of this information with publicly available information, or we're layering publicly available information with proprietary data. Whether that comes from stuff like this commercial databases like TLO or Westlaw or Lexis or other places like that. Maybe it's forensic information that you get from a digital forensics provider that you're working with to look at smartphones or workstations during some kind of internal theft investigation. Occasionally we have the luxury of working with a client that uses e-discovery platform like Reveal or Relativity, but oftentimes we're not as lucky. And for smaller companies, solo practitioners, maybe it's not in the budget to go out and buy access into those types of things. So no matter what the type of data you're working with or what the source is, the most important part of the whole process is to kind of develop a plan for how you're going to attack this problem. And so what's going to dictate a lot of that planning process and organization and analysis is whether you're working with neatly structured data or if it's unstructured. And sometimes even structured data has problems with it. You might get that huge SQL database that maybe wasn't built properly, or maybe is just something you're not familiar with and you don't really know how to attack it. Maybe you've got address information that's broken up into different fields and you need it combined into one for some reason. there's a whole host of different ways that you can encounter problems with structured data or need to structure it from different sources. Something we frequently look at is federal election contribution records, and those can be, downloaded in CSVs and are pretty easy to manage. But then once you have all that information, figuring out what to do with it is sometimes part of the challenge. And like I said, anybody who's worked with Maltego knows that you're always about 2 mouse clicks away from having a giant problem that you can't really digest visually, and there's no way you can throw a 20,000 entity chart into a report and expect it to have any real meaning other than just a bunch of like push pins and string tied together. So there's just something to consider for all of these different types of data, and what the end client is going to need. Maybe it's a report in a PDF. Maybe it's you're providing raw data to them, and they're somebody who's more savvy and can handle that. Or maybe there's a back and forth process that you need to work through and help share this data, sort of in that like e-discovery review kind of perspective. And maybe that 2,000 entity chart in Maltego is really told by, the story is really told by a dozen entities, that maybe you just pull those out and really only focus on that. Just a lot of different ways to sort of attack that planning puzzle. The obvious answer when it comes to talking about things like structured data in CSVs or other types of, rows and columns is Excel. I mean, it's the obvious first choice for any sort of approach like this. And mentioning that FEC information, one example that I've got is we had to look at the restaurant industry in particular, and sort of what were certain people in certain cities donating to in terms of PACs and campaigns, and where was money going, who was giving it, what did that look like. And there's being the restaurant industry is enormous. We had over 20,000 rows of data of contributions. There were 5,000 plus employers in there, millions in contributions, and kind of focusing on that first set of information. We had to then figure out like, okay, which of these people in here that donated to these campaigns are actually in the industry we care about. And there were things like doctors and CEOs and architects, and maybe those CEOs are important if they're part of a restaurant group or something like that, but most of these are maybe not of interest. So sifting through some of that initial noise was an easy and pretty simple process, just using pivot tables. And we were able to kind of extract that useful information to really kind of narrow in on, okay, these are the different occupation types that we're concerned with, or these are easily identifiable restaurants, or restaurant groups or catering companies, just that sort of thing, and kind of get a refinement of that data set that was kind of untenable to work with at first. The things can be improved a bit with pie charts and other graphics, but kind of out of the box, things really start to feel like an old high school or college report that just really looks kind of dated and not great. But fortunately, some of the information you're working with can be represented in more than just simple charts and graphs, or information in a table, pivot table, or not. And sometimes you're dealing with geographical data where maybe plotting the points out on a map is more beneficial, or maybe just a word cloud of kind of the most common terms in a data set is useful to help convey what some findings are. And fortunately, if like me, you're not really that skilled or creative in visualizing this sort of stuff, there's some resources out there that can help you. And shout out to Josh Cottrell on YouTube. He does a lot of tutorials and demonstrations on how to visualize information in Excel in ways I didn't even know were possible. Some of these charts and graphs look like they might have been made in Photoshop or Illustrator or some other graphics program, but actually they were done in Excel, and just have a really, depending on your perspective, a really clean and polished look, and can really help tie a report together and relay information that's easy to understand. And I'm admittedly trying to like learn how to leverage these things myself and help develop some, new ways of showing this type of data rather than just, again, charts and graphs and simple tables. But talking about the unstructured side of things, one of the simplest ways to help deal with some of that information, whether it's received from FOIAs or from court records or maybe poorly photocopied documents or other image-based PDFs and other files, is to run optical character recognition on them, or OCR. It's such a simple and obvious step. I feel kind of silly for mentioning it, but it really allows you to take information that maybe wasn't easily put into some other tool, whether that's Excel or whether that's, a Word document or some other text file, to make it searchable, to make it, potentially indexable, and to provide, more of an easy way to digest what's in there than simply just reading through it page by page by page. In one instance, we were looking at some IP address logs that we received in PDF form, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't OCR'd by default. And so, obviously, again, like very simple first step, but just, OCRing that document set, we were able to then copy paste, that information into, into Excel and create some tables and kind of clean it up a little bit and begin, really looking at and analyzing this information that was, thousands and thousands and thousands of rows long, that just reading through a PDF, even if it was searchable, just wasn't going to be a way to really efficiently conduct this investigation. So from there, we were able to, dedupe IP addresses to find unique IPs listed within there, and then ran, IP whois lookups through an API to quickly associate the ISP information and geolocation information for that. And then within Excel, also, used VLOOKUP, which for anybody not familiar with is basically just a way to say, find this string of information in this column and then take this piece of information and associate it with that back into this larger data set. And kind of simply, the way that I used it was anywhere that you see this IP address, then place, Comcast and Chicago, Illinois with that IP. Again, at least to me now, very simple, but, early on in my career, kind of, a magical wizardry of Excel usage that I didn't know about at the time. A similar example involved, that next slide, production from a wireless provider with kind of photocopied call records and SMS record activity that also had tower data listed, kind of, thankfully. But again, it was just simply, running that through OCR. We could then import that data into Excel and do similar analysis, dedupe the numbers, look through those investigative databases like TLO and others, or even, online providers, free providers like True People Search, Fast People Search, those types of places, to figure out who these subscribers are, and then kind of repopulate that information back into the table to get, a complete picture of kind of who was called when, and who was the caller, who was the recipient, kind of thing. You can get much more complex with your analysis. You can use things like conditional formatting to quickly, go through a document, find and highlight specific values, like maybe particular phone numbers or IPs or names of key people or other key items that you don't want to miss or you need to call specific attention to. And you can use some simple formulas to either split or join strings of text from one cell into multiple cells or vice versa, depending on what you're trying to do. Maybe it's you've got 123 Main Street, Chicago, and Illinois in 3 cells or in 1 cell, and you either need to, merge everything into 1 or break it up into 3. There's ways you can structure formulas within Excel to kind of break that apart or put it back together, depending on what you needed to do. Part of that IP address exercise that we went through and also involved trying to figure out time zones, which anybody who's ever dealt with, lots of different time-based information knows time zones can be a nightmare. In this case, the IP address logs were in GMT. Our office is in Chicago. Our client was in Denver. The subject was in Atlanta. So we've got 4 different time zones going on here. And it was kind of a nightmare to try and figure out, okay, this one is GMT, are we +5, -4? Is it daylight savings right now? Is it not? Was it when, this call record was recorded? And, a simple formula in Excel to do that, plus or minus shift in time zone really helped simplify things, made it much more manageable to digest, and just was way faster to try and reference, different and find different items that occurred on different dates and different times than just simply trying to, do that math in my head, which I'm not very good at all. Where'd my mouse go? So sometimes, we need to incorporate geolocation data into investigations too. Like I mentioned, those call records had tower information for where those calls pinged off of. And, whether it's, subjects like that, or maybe you're trying to locate witnesses to an accident, or co-claimants in a class action suit, or other information. Maybe you're working with a law firm, for some employment type situation where you can get mobile device location data from, a company-owned smartphone, or maybe you're getting that through subpoena power for whatever reason, if you're working with a law firm. Sometimes there's government organizations that publish, location-based data that may be beneficial in an investigation, depending on the scenario. And being able to visualize that is, in my experience, incredibly helpful. Google Earth Pro is, the easy to use, free, kind of ubiquitous option for that. It provides some custom mapping abilities with, location points and shape and image overlays and some other tools. But, it can get kind of cluttered looking pretty quick, and, in my opinion, is not like terribly professional looking when you start putting screenshots and things into a report. And depending on what you're doing, you may run into some, roadblocks on being able to work with certain data types or not. QGIS or QGIS is kind of a professional level, albeit still free, GIS application that provides much more advanced layer creation from, vector-based images or raster-based images, or layers, shape files. I don't know how to create those myself, but oftentimes through those government agencies, you can find, pre-built shape files, whether that's through GIS, county recorder type offices for property information, or through other agencies. Again, depending on use case, depending on what you're doing, like some of that may be helpful. And you can import, any type of location data really that you want from CSVs or other text delimited input types. And then one of the other benefits too is that you can use any sort of base map you want, really, which, is sort of that like bottom layer of your map, whether it's street names or satellite imagery or topographic maps. Whether you want to use OpenStreetMaps or you have Google Maps API, USGS topos, the sky is kind of the limit on what you can start with as sort of your base layer. And the output, I think, just looks a lot cleaner and less cluttered. There's also some plugins available that you can use to do things like create videos of sort of like, location over time, if you have a time layer to your information as well, which can be helpful. This is, an example of Google Earth Pro, looking at, for example, locations of co-claimants from a class action suit, trying to figure out, okay, do these people live near each other? Do they maybe know each other? Are they next door neighbors? Is there some kind of, collusion or conspiracy going on here? Or, whatever your purpose may be, but it just sort of, it has that like instantly recognizable, like, oh, this is Google Earth. And pro or con, I'll leave up to you, but, in a lot of cases, I tend to prefer a little cleaner look than this. And that's where QGIS comes into play. This is some of that same data, but because of the more advanced, layer abilities, the different base maps available, it just can look a lot cleaner. Which, again, pro or con, I'll leave up to you. But here's some of that cell tower data again, just an example of what things can look like in QGIS before it was sort of square little icons. These are round. You can change colors. You can have different types of shapes and other things and labels. But it's very customizable and very very useful if you put in a little bit of time to learn how to use it. And then this is an example of some of that kind of government data. While I was teaching myself how to use this just for fun, I downloaded some stuff from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, which was kind of just like these shape files, the green layers there of all public land in Wisconsin. And then I took a data set that I found from the Wisconsin State Liquor Board of all brew pubs licensed in the state. So if you're like me and you like spending, a day or weekend out fishing or mountain biking or hiking, and maybe you want some refreshments afterwards, here's a handy map you can create that shows where you are and where all those different brew pubs are. Maybe that liquor board type information is useful for competitive intelligence. Looking at the craft beer industry, if maybe you've got a client in that space. Just an example of some of that type of data that you can find that's location based or can be made location based from government sources and other departments, kind of, really globally, but particularly across the US. Like Matt mentioned too, leading up into this talk, sometimes you've got files that you're working with that just are so large and so massive that you either can't open them with any reasonable tool, or there's just no way you can go through the data in any kind of reasonable amount of time. And that's where things like regular expressions or regex can come into play, which is regex is used to see if there's a string of characters contained in any specific pattern that you're looking for, and you can quickly use it to identify and extract certain types of data, like email addresses are a common one, or phone numbers or domain names. They all sort of have a very similar structure of, in the case of an email address, it's username in a bunch of different variations, @ and then a domain name, or maybe sometimes there's subdomain involved in that too. But you can create a string here, like the one shown in an example, to search through 100,000 pages of, in one example that I had to use this in, over 100,000 pages of email header information, and the text files were like 100 gigabytes each, and we needed to extract sender and recipient information from all of those different records. And using regex and a simple PowerShell script, I scanned an entire directory of text files and output all of the email addresses located within them into a separate text file, and that was just easily imported into Excel. And you've taken what if you tried to do it by hand would be hundreds of hours worth of work, and regex and PowerShell, and about 45 seconds later, and you've got your list of 10,000 emails that appeared within this data set. It can be very, very valuable to extract information from text files and other types of data sets. Speaking again of 100+ gigabyte text files, if you've ever tried to open anything like that, even with a healthy amount of memory on a workstation, Windows Notepad will very frequently choke on big documents like that. And I wouldn't even begin to try with Word. So sometimes you need something more robust to open those large text files. And Notepad++ it's a powerful open source text editor. It has a lot of features like tabbed editing, syntax highlighting if you're actually writing code. It has regex built into the find and replace. So if you're not good with PowerShell or Python or other scripting, like I'm not, you can use regex strings within the find tool in Notepad++. And it gives you a lot of power and options when looking through those types of files. You can also, you can use that find and replace throughout entire directories too, or multiple text files you have open. It's handy when you're working with a lot of different documents, but maybe you don't want to combine them all into one, but you want to search them all at once. And maybe you don't necessarily want to use Regex to generate a listing of all those different items that you're looking for, and you just want to sort of like poke around. I used this when we had an internal investigation where there were a number of CSV files of file paths and file names from a bunch of forensic images from workstations, and we needed to kind of quickly look through, looking for specific items and specific documents we knew might exist on these computers, and just kind of very quickly search through all documents at once, and we're able to kind of dig through that information a lot more efficiently than kind of opening one by one and going through and looking for individual things. We use Google Workspace for a lot of our work, and for cloud storage in particular. And within Google Workspace, there's a bunch of different tools and a bunch of different tricks you can leverage to help working with data in a variety of different ways. And one of the most often overlooked features that I've seen is just the ability, if you're using Google Drive, to search through a number of different documents or directories just at one time and find results within them. Kind of anecdotally, long ago in my insurance days, I had a workers' comp case that I was assigned to manage that it kind of bugged me when I got it. And something about the address just looked familiar and I couldn't quite place it. But eventually, I took that address and searched it within our case management tool. And eventually I found that we had worked a different workers' comp claim for another individual who lived at the same address about a year prior. And it turns out it was husband and wife. They didn't share the same last name, but they both worked for the same employer. They both used the same doctor and the same claims management company. And nobody had figured out that they both had been on workers' comp at the same time, and actually ended up being responsible, plus the doctor, for over $1 million in fraudulent claims. And the insurance company never put it together. The case management company never put it together. But by just being a little bit like, that looks familiar, I think I've seen that before, ended up kind of blowing the doors wide open on that pair of claims. Anybody who has worked in protective intelligence or threat investigations has probably encountered some frequent flyers from client to client or protectee to protectee, and being able to quickly reference subjects or vehicles or other information that you might have come across in a prior kind of protective intel assignment or workup, can help quickly assess what might be going on and help inform threat level determination on maybe a new item that's popped up that maybe is actually the same person you've looked at before. Just one of those things that it's really valuable to be able to look through your own historic information, particularly from that type of perspective. In a more recent case, working with a law firm, we were given a bunch of WhatsApp text messages and voice messages that involved a bunch of different subjects, and we were working with another investigative partner, and kind of as a team, we needed to review and analyze and kind of tag those messages, much like you would do with an e-discovery review platform like Relativity or Reveal or what have you. But we didn't have the luxury of having that. And so with Google Workspace, I just simply created a sheet, their kind of version of Excel, with links to the MP3 recordings of those voice messages, as well as a Google Doc of a transcription of the audio recording. So you could both listen to and read, what was said by who. And then, side note, like Google Docs doesn't have transcription built in, but the Office 365 version of Word does. So if that's something that you might need to leverage at some point to quickly turn a bunch of audio into words, which again can be very helpful for doing keyword searches to try and find terms and names and dates and that sort of thing. Office 365's Word version can do that. At least I think there might be some like monthly caps on how much you can run there, but anyway, so from this one sheet, we were kind of able to go through and tag for relevance and sort of review and flag different items in here. And, basically it created a very simple e-discovery platform for this, pretty one specific purpose. But if you don't have Google Drive or something similar, and you need to kind of go beyond what Notepad++ can do for searching through text files, not a problem. Once you've got your data kind of organized wherever it is in a folder on your computer or multiple folders, there's a free open source tool, DocFetcher, that you can specify folders you want it to scan and index for keyword searching, text-based searching of PDFs, Word documents, Excel files, MP3 metadata, even Outlook PSTs or other types of email archives or other files. It works with a lot of different types of file types. But again, like working, kind of in that sort of like e-discovery type situation, working with a law firm, we use DocFetcher to be able to quickly search through thousands of court filings and exhibits and our own kind of investigative research documents to kind of quickly reference, where do we see where this name pops up anywhere, or do we, see email addresses or phone numbers, or hey, I think I remember seeing this thing in a filing. Is it anywhere else? And we're able to use DocFetcher to really quickly kind of scan through all those documents and be able to do those searches in a pretty efficient way. Another kind of organization tool that I've used and like quite a bit is Obsidian. It's a note-taking and organization tool. It's kind of like OneNote or Evernote, but it's open source and uses some community plugins as well. In addition to using markup language for formatting, you can link between different pages or use hashtags. You can create flowcharts and mind maps within it, kind of out of the box. I won't go into too much depth on it. Micah Hoffman, Web Breacher on Twitter, he actually has some really great, kind of a review and write-ups and examples of use cases and templates for Obsidian. But again, kind of for my fellow elder millennials out there, think of it as kind of an infinitely sized digital trapper keeper with all those different tab dividers and a whiteboard and evidence board with your push pins and string and newspaper articles kind of all tied into one little digital package to kind of keep track of all your notes and subjects and just anything else you're trying to organize that isn't sort of that like other structured data that you're getting that goes into Excel or into a SQL database or anything like that. Super helpful and again, free. And then, with all the kind of new wave of AI-based solutions, I'd be kind of remiss to at least not mention how you might be able to leverage some of these tools. I'm honestly a bit apprehensive to start throwing potentially sensitive or confidential information into ChatGPT or Bard or what have you, especially working with, as is probably pretty clear, we work a lot with law firms and other clients who maybe don't want that information kind of floating around out there. And in testing, like I've gotten some really, really bad information from kind of querying certain things on, ChatGPT and Bard. And like many of you, I'm sure too, like I've gotten them in trouble a little bit. I started using Bard to kind of try and give me some, information on maybe Twitter profiles, like how many posts, what's their general sort of, posting like, or I guess, sorry, it's X now. But it started to give me some information and then kind of out of nowhere, it pulled I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that. And just sort of shut down and was like, wow, that was helpful. But that said, when talking about, processing and analyzing information, I think it does have value there. And recently, we had a threat investigation that I was working on that the subject had kind of sent this, novel or manifesto type document that was over 200 pages long to our end client. And using ChatGPT and using a PDF analysis plugin with that, I was able to summarize the document and kind of query it for themes. I asked it, hey, tell me what the common themes are within this, within this document. Asked it if there were certain names in there. Asked it to kind of summarize just an overall kind of book report of what was going on there. And it saved a lot of time and provided some actually useful information. In kind of the example on screen here, which is a bit wordy, but there's some criminal activity that gets talked about in this novel that it turns out kind of mirrors this suspected subject that we had identified in real life, looking through court filings and criminal history and that sort of thing, which sort of was helpful to know. And the quote unquote Mr. Roberts that is in the last line here, that was a slip up by the author, and they had accidentally used what turned out to be their real last name in a poorly proofread or edited novel here, instead of the character's name. So I guess one takeaway for that is that they should hire a good proofreader. But summarizing large documents like court records, I've used it to look for witness names, find some basic facts, build a timeline from court filings and complaints and that sort of thing, to help kind of speed up the process of reviewing that types of information. So just kind of something to be cognizant of and aware of. And if you're going to dabble with AI, make sure you're okay with Skynet knowing the information you're giving it. But hopefully, eventually these are much more, reliable and robust and useful to help kind of parse through a lot of that data and a lot of that information. And with that, thank you. Hopefully I was able to provide some, tips and tricks for helping to organize and analyze information and data from a bunch of different sources. And hopefully somebody had an aha moment or two and might put these to work later on today. Appreciate the opportunity, and I guess if we have time for any questions or anybody has any questions.